Stephen James Steve Howe was born on April 8, 1947. He was born into a family of music enthusiasts. Steve Howe is a guitar player for one of my favorite bands, Yes, and he plays in several other bands other than Yes. When he was 12, he received his first guitar. He was self-taught and used other musicians to gain inspiration from. His early influences were Les Paul, Speedy West, and Jimmy Bryant. Steve Howe has been a huge part of my musical compendium, and I would like to show you a vintage vinyl record from 1974 of Yes's album Relayer. So here's the vintage vinyl. You just open the cover up, opens up like a book, and right on the inside you can see a picture of the whole band, including Steve Howe. And they have the lyric book in here with the vinyl record, so it's pretty cool. I love it. Steve Howe has played in several other bands other than Yes. My first point that I want to hit is that Steve Howe had so many other bands before Yes, and he was just a huge part of the musical movement back in the 60s. His first band that he played in was the Syndicats in 1963 through 1965, and the Encyclopedia of Popular Music is how I gained that knowledge. He later joined another rock group called the In Crowd in 1965, right after the Syndicats broke up. And after the In Crowd, Steve played for several famous musicians in search of a musical challenge up to his standards. He was seeking that challenge all up until he was asked to play for the psychedelic prog rock group Yes. And throughout the first 10 years he played for Yes, he wrote at least 2 full albums for the group. Both albums went platinum within years. And Yes ended up falling apart in 1981, but that didn't stop Steve Howe's thriving musical career. Howe has been praised for each piece of music he has ever touched. After Yes fell apart, Steve he immediately joined a band called Asia. He actually helped form the band called Asia right after Yes fell apart. And Yes, and Asia sold over 10 million albums to this day, and that was gained through the Prog Archive magazine. Steve also went on to regroup with Yes, and he still plays with them today. Howe's fame has been long-lived and well-worshipped also. Guitar World magazine said that Steve Howe is a brilliant musical colorist whose evocative volume pedal swells and echoey textures possess all the subtle and complex expressiveness of the human voice itself. Steve Howe has been on several platinum albums, and in total, Steve Howe has been a part of almost 50 albums in his musical career. He is also my biggest influence in music, and I encourage you to look him up if you haven't heard of him.